Thanks for joining us on this, what I hope is going to be a discussion to talk about information and tools and strategies to influence your compensation. We have a great group of people here to answer your questions and present a little bit of information. All of their bios are on our website. Vicki Cudmore is a compensation executive, was with Bose Corporation for many years. K2 Kotwicka, Kathleen is our EVP, Chief Knowledge Strategist. She does all the research for the SEC, and she'll be commenting on some of the research we have behind us. And then Steve Walker, who we've been involved with for literally over 20 years. He is the partner of the Foushee Group. They do the only real compensation survey for the security industry of this magnitude. And so I'm going to turn it over to K2, and she's going to tell you about the barometer poll that we had and elaborate on that a bit. K2?
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to see all the people could join us today. I am Kathleen Kotwicka, but you will hear K2. That is my nickname, in case you wonder what that is. So we ran a poll last month, what we call the Security Barometer Poll. It's open to our security community, the people that visit our website, our newsletter, our social media channels. And we asked, well, the first question we asked on this poll was, in the last 5 years, do you think your compensation has kept pace with other functions in your organization or with other organizations? And we had 75 people complete this poll, particular poll, which is pretty good. And you can see, and if you can't see, I'm going to describe it. We have a chart up, and a majority, 60% said no, they don't feel that their compensation has kept pace, and 40% said they do think it has kept pace. I was a little surprised by that. I thought the no percentage was going to be a little bigger, but it still is far more people than the yes people think they're not fairly compensated. The second question, do you feel the rest of your team is fairly compensated? I found this also interesting, that it was an almost 50-50 split, with no, say 50%, and yes 45%. So it was interesting, given that in the other question, it was 60% said no. And we surmised that it's possible the security leaders are working, and often they do, to get their team compensated first. So they're maybe still working on that, and then get to their compensation and try to up that. As far as the other option on the second chart, between yes, no, and other, it was just 5%. All of the answers were, I don't know. They don't know if their team is fairly compensated. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, on this slide, I went through all the commentary to the question, why do you think this is the case? From the first question, do you think your compensation has kept pace? And then yes or no, and then if yes, why do you think this is the case? And the same for no. And we got some, this is just a roll-up of some of the themes I saw across the 75 people. Not everybody answered or commented on this particular question, but most of them did. And the themes I found for those that answered yes, they think their compensation has kept pace, were the person, the employee coming into a company, established compensation requirements up front. So right away, some people were dealing with that. They weren't waiting to find out what they might get, etc. Some people said our security department shows our value, or shows how we deliver value. And I then turn around and say, so that is why they think they get a fair pay, because it's clear why they're there. Organization has a solid and consistent compensation policy across the organization, or they're under pressure to do so recently. We saw both of those things. The last one for the yes was aggressive models, compensation models, are being used in some companies to retain the talent during the great resignation / talent drain. For the no answers, the themes were security needs to be better at negotiations like the professional sector. Some had fixed rates, so there's no movement on their compensation. And that would be, in some cases, they self-identified as contractor or in the government sector. The organization does not have, where was I? Sorry. The organization does not have money to support the departments that don't contribute revenue. And that is something we hear a lot about. And then the last one is security does not benchmark or compare the market, or there's a lack of transparency. That is what we heard, and we can discuss some of these in the Q&A section if we want. We already do have a lot of questions that Bob said, but we'll try to do the best to get to all your questions. And now I'm going to pass it to Vicki.
Good morning, afternoon, and somewhere in the middle of the night to everybody. Bob asked me to join in and talk a little bit to you about the compensation side of the world here, as I have been a compensation practitioner. So I'm going to go over some basic information that might be interesting for you to know when you start looking and talking about pay. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the role of the compensation team or department in an organization is to provide management with valid, reliable information on the price of labor and salary information on specific jobs. The team keeps abreast of developments and current trends and ensures the company complies with laws relating to employee compensation. Large companies, around 1,000 employees or more, typically have a dedicated compensation staff or person who's responsible for evaluating and pricing jobs, creating pay ranges, collecting salary, survey data, participating in surveys, and keeping current, again, on developments. And in smaller companies, this may be done, work may be done by an HR generalist, or it may be outsourced. In any case, the security division and HR typically work together on many issues, typically employee-related issues and policy. And you probably have already a good contact within HR who can connect you with the compensation staff or the person in your company who's responsible for compensation. Having a good relationship and a good connection with the compensation department is one of the best things you can do for you and your team as a manager. And it's important for you to understand the company's pay program. And basically what I mean by pay program is how your company makes choices in paying employees. And that includes such things as the elements and mix of elements such as base pay, bonus, profit sharing, benefits, the desired level of pay in comparison to the market. So some companies, and I worked for one, desired to pay a very high base salary and a lower bonus because it was a privately owned company and the owner felt it was very important for employees to have a good high level of take-home pay every month and not be worrying about making decisions to affect a bonus. So every company has a different way of looking at that. And, you know, how are jobs valued in the company? How does the company set pay guidelines and decide salary ranges for each job? So the comp program is a great way, questions about the comp program is a great way for you to open a conversation about pay in your company, specifically, how am I paid? How does my team stack up against the market? How does compensation use survey data, because to know what the market is doing gives you the greatest advantage in making sure your salaries are competitive. So companies typically participate, as Bob mentioned, in established national and local salaries surveys that are sponsored by independent third-party contractors. So none of the participants gets to see exactly what a competitor is paying. These surveys are usually broad surveys that have several benchmark or common job descriptions. So the comp team will typically match the company jobs to the survey descriptions and then provide compensation information to the survey vendor for each job matched. The survey vendor will then collect and consolidate the data from the survey participants and produce a report and send it back to the participants. When compensation gets that report, they'll compare the survey data to the company's pay data to understand how the company is paying compared to the market overall and for specific jobs. That data is then used to make possibly salary adjustments, set salary increase budgets, create pay ranges for jobs. It's very important for companies to have a reliable source of salary data. And it's also important as a first step to be able to match the jobs in the company appropriately to the survey. That is best done, the survey job matching, when the people who know the jobs, that would be you, the management, work with the people who know the survey, and that is compensation. Surveys typically report the data in a variety of ways, but the data elements that they report are generally base salary, which is an annual regular pay that excludes additional income, such as bonus, profit sharing, overtime, shift differential. So they're going to pay, they're looking at your annual regular pay. Surveys also report bonuses, and typically it's the annual bonus that's paid, and those would be cash payments that are used to reward employees for company and or individual performance. This is usually not a guaranteed form of pay year over year, and it's often expressed as a target percent of base pay that employees would receive if their personal goals and or the company goals are met. These two, base pay and bonus, are combined to show a total comp, an annual base salary plus the reported annual bonus. And it's important to look at total comp because, as I mentioned earlier, you might have a company who pays a very high base and a low bonus and vice versa. So to look more than just at a base salary. Companies also grant long-term, some companies grant long-term incentive, and long-term incentive is the value of incentive granted to employees in addition to a bonus, and does not actually come as part of, reported as part of the total comp, but separately. And this also often takes the form of a stock option or restricted stock or some other long-term vehicle. In the surveys, you'll see an overall, typically an overall summary of all the data displayed on a position, but also you'll see that data broken out by organization size, typically as a revenue size, by a region, by an industry, and some maybe other appropriate financial dimension. So the survey, the security survey, the Foushee survey does in fact break out wonderfully into different regions and financial dimensions as well. So that is really important for people to be able to look at. Well, there are a lot of things going on in the world of compensation these days, and it's more important than ever to have good, reliable survey data. The tight labor market is driving up pay in many fields. This is true, I know, in security. I believe cybersecurity is the hot market right now and has been and will continue to be. Inflation is creating something called pay compression. And pay compression is when you hire new employees at or above pay of current employees. So it's important to know what's going on there. There is more demand from employees for pay transparency and the desire to understand how pay is determined, how employees are paid in comparison to the market and to their peers. And there are a lot of questions about pay equity. So I think you probably have heard frequently the question, the term pay transparency. So what is pay transparency? Pay transparency is when an employer is open about pay for jobs at the organization and why people are paid the way they're paid. And there are different degrees of pay transparency. Some companies may disclose salary ranges for groups and certain jobs. On one end of the spectrum, it might be just the basic guidelines or communication on how the compensation program works at that company, to the other end of the spectrum where everyone's pay is posted. It's important, and because it encourages companies to review their comp philosophy and their strategies and be able to communicate these so that people feel they are being paid fairly. So what else is going on? Well, there's a lot of information out on the internet on pay. So although it might not always be reliable, it is out there and anybody has access to it. So you definitely will have people who look at the compensation out there and begin comparing their own pay to that. There are new laws in many states, and that trend is continuing. For report, one of the things is for reporting, the requirement for reporting job ranges when posting jobs. There are in some states, and here it's true, in Massachusetts where I live, on asking candidates about their current pay before you make an offer. And there are many states who prohibit companies from retaliating against employees if they discuss pay. And that used to be, if you would ask employees, please, we ask you not to discuss your pay with other people, and something we may take action, but that's not allowed anymore. Let's see. I think just a couple more things that I would like to cover in this compensation 101 in a very small nutshell is the reliable and valid surveys. What are those? Those are what qualifies a survey as that. Those are surveys that have solid participation with known companies. They're run by well-established third-party survey providers. They use great care in reviewing company data submission to make sure that it's, not something way out of line. And they're able to report data on base pay and total cash and break out the data by industry and geographic location. So if your company has a compensation department or someone who's responsible for that function, they're very likely to be participating in some good solid surveys. As Bob explained, some of these surveys are general surveys, so they're going to have a subset of the of security positions, not all of them. Another thing is that there are questions about how do I match my company jobs to the surveys. The survey description might not encompass everything that my company does. So we always say when you're looking at jobs, about 80% of the duties, if they match, it's a good match. Steve, did you want to add something?
No, I would just say that when you're talking about surveys, the important thing that drives survey houses is Department of Justice guidelines on safe harbor.
Oh, yes.
And that protects the integrity of the data that the companies submit to us, for example, or any other survey house. And it gives us publication guidelines so that no one knows who's doing what to whom, but we just give it to you in the aggregate and percentile distributions. But I just wanted to mention that just from the safe harbor standpoint, because a lot of times people say, well, company doesn't want me to participate because they don't want to share my data or whatever the case is. Well, rest assured, if it's a good survey house, they're going to have to. I mean, there's no question one way or the other. You have to publish within those DOJ guidelines, and that ensures confidentiality of the data that's submitted to the survey.
Excellent.
That's it.
Steve, Steve, that's a great comment. And I think I've been working with surveys so long, I almost take that for granted that these good survey providers do that. So thank you for pointing it out.
You're welcome.
Another thing that some question, how do I get companies to participate in survey, and we don't have any budget for this. And so the comp team looks at all their surveys on a yearly basis, probably when they're doing their budgets and budgeting for what they're going to spend for surveys. I would say if you can get with a compensation person or somebody in HR and speak to a survey speak to a comp person about a survey that you think is worth participating in and why. This is a good time to do it because a lot of companies that are on a fiscal calendar a year will be doing that budget work in advance now. And that's sort of comp in a nutshell from a practitioner.
So one question for both you and Steve. Would you comment a little bit on, places like Glassdoor and even LinkedIn now, they're starting to post information about jobs, but talk a little bit about the methodology and reliability difference of those, if you would. I think those and groups like ASIS or different magazines used to run salary surveys. In my experience, every one of those was grossly underreporting the salaries of any of the positions of my team, and they caused me problems. But could you both comment on that a little bit? Vicki, you want to go first?
Yep. So, right. So there's a lot of information out there. Salary.com, pay scale, Glassdoor, as you mentioned. A lot of it is data that's been collected on a ginormous scale and consolidated. It might not have been really vetted as good data. You don't know really where it comes from. You don't know how many participants, how many data points there are in that data. On the other spectrum, you'll see in, like Indeed, you'll see data, you'll see anecdotal data, like my pay is this, or, one company pays this. So it's data that drives questions, but it's not often reliable data because you really don't know what's behind it, who's participating in it. And it's interesting that you'd say, Bob, that the data isn't has been grossly underreported, because the other thing you don't know is how old is that data. And if the job market is moving quickly and that data is a year or a year and a half old, or some of it is, that can definitely pull that data down, that information, make it be reported as low. Steve, do you want to add anything?
I would just submit that two things. One is the practitioner, the comp practitioner. I have never taken into consideration to put into action in an organization a survey that's done anonymously. For example, as a member survey or something like that, where groups have gone out and said, hey, we're going to put together a compensation. We're going to ask compensation questions on these jobs. The job description is about 2 sentences long. There's not a lot of qualification requirements, and so it's very broad-based. And it's kind of like liar's poker. So if you're asking an individual to give me your compensation, and I'm that individual, then how do I know versus a standard survey where we actually go to the comp group and say, pull your numbers and give us your information, as opposed to Steve Walker saying, well, I'm a security manager 3 at such and such company. I'm making $100,000 a year. I really want to make $130,000 a year, so I'm going to put my compensation level at 130, for example. Then it's kind of like a liar's poker type thing. There's no validation. There's no way to reckon that that's indeed the truth or not the truth. In terms of underreporting, that's probably not a good match, because remember that surveys do not match individuals. They match positions, because that's what pay is first fundamentally based on, is the position value to the market or to the organization. Then it floats down to the individual. So it's critical that anybody who does participate in any surveys, that they have a good match or a good understanding to say, this is what I do 80% of the time, whatever the case is, and it comes from the group who manages your compensation, which is your HR group, for example. I mean, certainly a CSO can call us and say, I want to participate. I have a good handle on my jobs, blah, 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 and I want to go ahead and submit. We may take a CSO submission, but certainly it's going to be difficult for us to take a submission from, say, an investigator 2, because they don't have access to the information other than their own in the company. So what we're trying to accomplish is capture a lot more data and capture that data in a more precise and succinct way. So that's what you have to worry about from surveys such as those that are online, or how old it is, or the survey methodology, or who they went to, or what their position descriptions look like, or all those things combined, where it can be questionable in terms of what the data comes out at the back end.
The devil is always in the details, and even defining what is comp. Is this your base salary? Is this a starting salary for a new person in that position, not what you're making after you've been in that job for 15 years? And in security, we have tremendous problems with definitions, even what a security program is. We have security programs where it's technology, physical security, investigations, maybe workplace violence, and risk assessments. We have other security programs that are made up of 22, 23, 25 programs. And so the duties and responsibilities are way, way larger, yet they're both called the security program. So, the slide that's up now really starts to hit at that. What are the title comparisons and the roles and responsibility differences? And I think that's the most important. And Steve has done a great job in kind of standardizing those 78 job descriptions. Many of the companies on the phone today have called looking for job descriptions. And we always say, start there. You're going to add to it, but you want that same basic definition so it can be compared to the rest of the industry. So stage one is always starting with that job description and title comparisons. If you're not doing that, you really should be, because you cannot be consistent and compared without that. The other is, I think, get your comp people involved with professional referrals. Before, I've been in this business since the 80s, the early 80s. We used to do networking. And when Steve first came out with the first survey in 2002, in 2001, he came to ISMA when I was on the board. And I asked them if I could work with him because I was in the middle of a huge comparison in Atlanta, comparing us with the other 18 headquarters-based Atlanta companies. And I was gathering job descriptions and that sort of thing because there was no place to go get comparisons of Fortune 500 companies. So getting involved with him, I had data to share, but the difference was he had credibility. Steve had worked as a compensation executive at Coca-Cola. No matter what I would have taken in, it would have been suspect because it was practitioner generated. And they were pretty surprised at how much data I had, but it wasn't until the comp people supplied it that it became an industry standard and started to set the market. The only thing I'm going to comment on now, and then we're going to jump into these questions, is that these things really do make a difference. In 2002, when Steve's first survey came out, the lowest increase anybody in my group got was 33%. We were grossly underpaid. The department had grown a lot, but security was an afterthought. Look, I got into the business as a punitive assignment. You know, they didn't know what to do with me, and they said, well, hell, anybody can do security. Let's put him in there. It's not a profession yet, but we're getting there. And the salaries certainly reflect that. I mean, $1 million as a CSO is not an unheard of number. $7 million as a CISO is not unheard of. There's big money in security now, and there's a lot of people in compensation and executive management that don't realize how demanded it. Get my dog's barking. Whoever's letting that dog bark, mine will jump out.
That's me. Sorry.
There's enough dogs on this call that we could have a pack go into hyperventilating here. So, but you know, these surveys are critically important. Title comparisons. We've gotten people's titles elevated from director to vice president. Some of that has to do with how much money you manage. What's the total comp or the total cost of security in your company? So all of these things are elements of it, and you really need to take a strong look at how your department compares to others, how your function compares to others, and how management views it.